Hey, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Unfeigned the podcast. I'm Jay, I'm your host, and today's episode is the sixth installment in our Brokenness to Healing series. I want to say before we dive in how grateful I am for those of you that have been along with me on this journey. I'm so thankful that you listen to the podcast. I'm so thankful that you've reached out. I've been so blessed to be able to connect with some of y'all. And I hope you continue on this journey. I also hope that you will share this podcast with everybody that you know. So, this sixth installment, I'm calling the restoration. And we're going to talk about something we all long for, but often fear, and that's restoration. More specifically, how do you begin to trust again and love again when the very things that broke you tied to relationships? Restoration is more than healing. It's renewal. And I want to talk about in this episode about how God restores what was lost and how we can begin to open our hearts again wisely, patiently, and faithfully. And I say this a lot. Faith is important to me. My relationship with Jesus is important to me. I'm not trying to force you to believe what I believe. And faith may not be important to you, but these same principles apply in how you can experience restoration. You see, restoration isn't the same as repair. Repair fixes something to make it function. We've all had something break in our lives, as far as something tangible or physical or whatever, that needed fixing, and maybe you fix it. Maybe you're the person that people call when something breaks and you're the fix-it person. Or maybe it was your parents, maybe it was your dad, maybe it was your mom, maybe it was your brother, maybe it was a friend. Maybe you have a guy, like I know a guy, right? So maybe you have somebody that you call and you need, when something breaks, you need to fix it. And that's repairing. So repair fixes something to make it function. But restoration returns it to its original beauty and purpose. Let me say that again. Repair fixes something to make it function. But restoration returns it to its original beauty and purpose. Excuse me. Now, when we talk about restoration, we're not saying that you're going to be restored back to who you were when you were broken. And we're not going back, just back in time. Restoration means you're going to return to how you were originally created. You were given a purpose. You have original beauty and purpose, and restoration brings you back to that, returns you to that, so that you can walk in the life that you were meant to walk in. You could be the person you were meant to be. In the Bible, Joel chapter 2, verse 25 says, I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. That verse isn't just about time. It's about trust, joy, peace, relationships, dignity, everything you thought was wasted or too far gone. You see, here's the truth. God doesn't just heal wounds. He restores the places the wounds damaged. Let me say that again. God doesn't just heal wounds. He restores the places that the wounds damaged. So let's be honest. When we've been hurt, when we're hurt, what do? We build walls, right? It is a very common thing for us to talk about. We all understand this concept of guarding our hearts or building walls, putting up walls around our heart. And the pain that we go through when we're hurt, when we experience brokenness in our lives, the pain that we go through, it makes us self-protective. We go into this self-preservation mode. And while building these walls and protecting our heart and guarding our heart serves us temporarily, long term, it becomes a prison. Here's what brokenness teaches us. It says, don't get too close. You can't trust anyone. Love will always disappoint you. You're safer alone. That's what brokenness teaches us. But here's what God teaches us. Love never fails. He makes all things new. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. There's a difference between guarding your heart in wisdom and shutting it down in fear. Let me say that again. There's a difference between guarding your heart in wisdom and shutting it down in fear. We all, excuse me, we all um, are familiar with the concept of guarding our heart, and we all understand that there's things, there's times, there's moments, there's boundaries, there's things in our lives that require us to guard our heart. Our hearts are precious. Our hearts matter, and so we have to protect it. It would be silly to treat it inappropriately, carelessly. So yes, there is something to guarding your heart in wisdom, but that's very different than shutting it down in fear, because we've been hurt or betrayed or whatever. Restoration is a process, and it often, this is what I've learned, it often happens in this order. Now, I'm speaking from my experience, my story. I know I say this a lot, but it's important. It's important to make these statements because faith is important to me. It may not be important to you. God is important to me. He may not be important to you. My relationship with Jesus is important to me. You may not have a relationship with Jesus, nor do you want one. So when I speak about God in my story, and I speak God and faith and Jesus into these things, it's because that's my experience. That's my story. But don't let what you believe or not believe discredit what I'm saying, because what the lessons I've learned and the things that I've learned over my experiences and my story, they're true because they're true. They work because they work. And so if faith is not important to you, don't dismiss the principles. Don't dismiss what you can learn from it. Okay, let me get back to this. So restoration's a process. It often happens in this order. In my story, this was the case. This is what I learned. So number one, trust in God. Before you can trust others again, you must rebuild your trust in the only one who has never failed you. This could be a whole nother podcast, whole nother episode. People always ask, why does God allow bad things happen to good people? We can spend a whole episode on that. Why does God do this if he's a good God? Why does he let this happen? And we can spend a whole lot of time in that, and I would love to do that. If you were ever interested, I would love to speak from my experience with Jesus Christ, with God, my relationship, my faith. I would love to share that with you. But in my story, before I could completely rebuild this trust in others, I had to rebuild my trust because I was hurt. I felt betrayed, right? I felt like, why are you letting this happen, God? And I had to rebuild my trust in him because he's never failed me. 1 Peter 5:10 says, and the God of all grace, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. So I had to ask, and as I'm telling you things about my story and what I did, translate that to your life. I had to ask, do I believe God is good, even when people are not? That's important. Wow, that hits different. Do I believe that God is good, even when people aren't? Do I trust him to write a better story than the one I lost? Wow. Do I trust God to write a better story than the one I lost? These are questions I had to ask myself, and they're important questions. Number two, trust in yourself. This one often gets overlooked, especially after betrayal, right? But after betrayal or bad decisions, we often lose trust in ourselves. We think, like, how did I miss the red flags? How could I be so naive? I'll never trust my judgment again. And maybe the exact wording isn't what you say to yourself, but I'm sure that in these situations, I'm sure we've said these things, very similar statements, and we made these statements to ourselves. But part of restoration is reclaiming your voice, your intuition, your boundaries, and your God-given discernment. Let me say that again. Part of restoration is reclaiming your voice, your intuition, your boundaries, and your God-given discernment. Number three, trust in others wisely. Okay, that wisely needs to be attached there, because This comes down to guarding our heart in wisdom. We have to discern what would be the right thing to do. But number 3, trust in others. And this is the hardest step because it requires vulnerability. Trusting in others requires vulnerability, but not blindness, right? We don't just trust just because, especially after we've been hurt or betrayed or whatever, and we're in this brokenness, we have to treat trust appropriately. We can't be careless with it. But it requires vulnerability, and that makes it hard because, in general, being vulnerable opens us up. It exposes us, and we don't like that because it could hurt. Restoration doesn't mean rushing. It means rebuilding, brick by brick, with boundaries and wisdom. And so I have these 3 mantras. I say them a lot, right? And I'm going to insert one of the mantras here because it applies and it's appropriate for this, for what we're talking about on this episode. But the mantra: choose, commit, and confront, right? So choose to believe restoration is possible. This is huge because if we're sitting in our brokenness, there's areas of brokenness in our life. There's areas of pain in our life. We've been betrayed, right? We're struggling with trusting others, ourselves, God, whatever it is. And we want to be healed. We don't want to feel broken. We don't want to be suffering. We don't want to experience this pain. Fill in the blank. And we want to be healed and restored. But sometimes I wonder if we believe we're too far gone, that restoration isn't possible. And so it's simple, but it's very difficult. And you have to choose to believe restoration is possible. Choose to believe your heart can beat again for someone else. This was extremely difficult for me because I thought I was too far gone. I thought that I would never be able to fully love someone, and I would never be able to be fully loved. And so I had to choose to believe that my heart could love someone else, that could be loved by someone else. Choose to believe God still has good things for you. This is difficult because if you're experiencing bad things, if you're suffering, if your life sucks, like how can you just be like, oh yeah, I believe God has good things for me? And I know it's hard, and I know it's crazy. But as we embrace this mantra, we have to make the simple but very difficult choice to believe that God still has good things for us. Then we have to commit to the process. Restoration's a process. Being healed is a process. We make the choice to believe these things. Now we have to commit to the process. Restoration won't feel natural. Okay, hear what I say. Hear what I'm saying. Restoration won't feel natural. It's not just going to happen naturally. It requires intention. You have to be intentional about your restoration. You might need to talk to somebody, right? You might need to talk to a counselor. You might need to talk to me, another coach. You might need to talk to a group, right? A support group. Maybe journaling is a thing that will help you commit to this process. So you might need these things, or maybe even it's space to grow emotionally and spiritually, right? And so all of these things require intentionality while you commit to the process. And here's a difficult one because none of us, how many of us really like to do this part? We have to confront our fears and our patterns. You must confront your fears and your patterns. And who really likes to do that? Why don't we like to do that? Well, because we have to come face to face with our brokenness, and it hurts, it's painful. We have to ask ourselves, what does love look like now that I'm healing? And sit in that question. Really answer it for yourself. Right? What does love look like now that I'm healing? What would it look like as you try to love someone else as a healed version? And I get it. These episodes in this series build upon one another, but you may not be at this point. You may not be in the restoration point yet, right? You still may be in the beginning of this process, and that's fine. And so you tuck these away, you keep them, but you glean what you can from them, right? And so you might be thinking, well, I don't know. I don't know what a healed version of me looks like. And I get that. But if you're going to ask yourself, what does love look like now that I'm healing? You can identify some of the toxic patterns and behaviors that you had while in your previous relationships. And so you replay those and you figure out what the opposite of those are. And also what a toxic behavior that you experienced from a previous relationship and what would be the opposite of that. Well, that's the healthy version, right? And so also ask yourself, what parts of me still resist trust? Especially after betrayal, it's extremely hard to trust again. And so you ask yourself, what parts of me are still resisting trust, still resist being able to trust people? If you don't confront your brokenness, if you don't confront the residue of your brokenness, you'll sabotage your restoration. And you know why? You know where it'll come from? It'll come from fear. You'll sabotage your restoration out of fear. My hope is that by doing this series and breaking down these episodes, the way that I've been over the last 6, well, and this is the 6th, that I would be able to make restoration and healing a bit tangible, right? And that's why I try to offer some practical tools at the end of towards the end of each of these episodes in this series. These are things that I did that helped me, that you can do, and obviously we're all at different parts of our healing journey. But even if we're not as far along, or maybe part of it doesn't apply to us yet, or whatever, it's still important. It still works. It's still true, and you can still glean something from it. And I know I keep saying journaling. And I'm being really honest here. I've always had a hard time journaling because I'd rather speak, and so that's why I recorded over 100 episodes that I've never released, because that for me that was my journaling. And I would encourage that. If you don't like journaling, if you don't want to sit down and write and you'd rather just free think and talk, just record. You don't have to start a podcast. I mean, you can. Yeah, absolutely. But you don't have to start a podcast, but you can just record yourself, and that, it's just like media journaling, right? Audio journaling or whatever. And so you can record yourself instead of writing it down, but it's a form of journaling. But that could be a very practical way to touch restoration, to begin healing. And for this episode, a good question maybe to start journaling or speaking about is, what areas of my life is God actively restoring? And maybe you're sitting here now listening to this episode and you don't know. Maybe you're at the beginning of the healing process. Maybe you're just surrounded by brokenness and you don't even know where to turn. You don't even know how to start to heal. And so maybe you can't answer this question, but it's still a good question to remember and to think ahead about, because at some point you will. Another question to ask yourself is, where am I afraid to trust again? You see, we all could identify areas of our life where we have difficulty trusting. And it's a good question to ask ourselves, where am I afraid to trust again? Because that will help us identify these areas, and then that is how we start to heal from those areas. So the Bible in Joel 2:25 says, I will restore the years. 1 Peter 5:10 says, he will restore you and make you strong. It's a tricky thing talking about trust, because especially after betrayal, and like I said, you don't want to guard your heart without wisdom, and so you don't want to just blindly trust everything and everybody. But if at least a good starting point is you're able to identify these areas where you're afraid to trust again, where you've built up these walls and you've guarded your heart around this area of trust, that's a great place to start healing from that. So another practical tool is, and I say this a lot, but maybe they're like reflection cards, right? These flashcards. And you can write these questions. Each time I've mentioned flashcards, like how we used to study when we were in school way back in the day. You could have these uh, uh, um, like flashcards, and you can even call them reflection cards. And when I've mentioned these and these questions, you write these questions on one side, and on the other side is where you can write down your notes, your thoughts, your feelings, whatever. And so a good question for this would be, what relationships or areas of my heart are still in need of restoration? Again, what relationships or areas of my heart are still in need of restoration? And again, this series each episode builds upon itself, and you may be at one like at one spot in your journey, and some of these things in these episodes may not apply to you yet because you may not know. You just may not be there yet. And that's okay. And that's okay. This is good to start to think about, because eventually you will be here. Another practical tool to think about is prayer, right? Whether or not faith is important to you, most everyone in their life gets to a point where they cry out to God, whether they know it or not. Because, when things get so dark and so bad, and the only thing that you can think to do is say, God, please help me, right? You may not, consider that crying out to God, but you are. And so prayer is good, and it works. And a good thing to do and good habit to get into is just guided prayer. So, you can pray whatever you want. There's no magic words, just talk to God. But if you need help, like, here's a good prayer. God, I want to trust you again, but I'm afraid. I've been hurt. Or maybe, God, I want to trust you for the first time, but I'm afraid. I've been hurt, and I don't want to build walls where you want me to build bridges. Restore what was stolen, my joy, my trust, my hope. Help me to trust you first, trust myself again, and wisely open my heart to others. You are the restorer of all things. I surrender this process to you. In Jesus' name, amen. It's good to have someone help you pray. Not that there's a magic formula, because you can just go and pray anything. Just open your heart, open your mouth, spill out whatever's inside to God. And He wants to listen. He wants us to do that. But sometimes it's good to have somebody help, guide you through prayer. And so these are just, each of these episodes that I've mentioned a little prayer at the end. It's a good thing. It's a good habit to make or to get into. So as I close this episode, we've talked about restoration, right? And there's a few things I want you to remember as I close this out. Restoration is never rushed, but it's always possible. I've said this many times on previous episodes, that I believe every relationship can be restored. I believe anyone can be restored. Anyone can be healed. But you have to remember, restoration is never rushed, but it's always possible. So it's a process. You may not be who you were, but that's the point, right? As we heal and we become restored, we may not be who we once were, but that's the point. You're becoming someone stronger, someone wiser, someone softer, someone braver. I mean, we can go on and on and on. But just remember that it's a process. And the process from going from brokenness to healing is becoming this new healed version of yourself. And it takes time. And you'll heal from certain things faster than you will from other things. And that's okay. Next episode, I'm going to talk about what it looks like to live healed, to live whole, to walk in the freedom of healing without the weight of past wounds. So before I sign off, just want to remind you, I want to connect. Some of y'all have been, and I've been able to connect with y'all, and it's been amazing. Email me, unfeignedpodcast@gmail.com. Send me a message on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Go to the website. It's unfeigned.org. That's www.unfeigned.org. A couple things to remember. The last Friday of every month, we have our live Q&A. It's been awesome for me because I get to see glimpses of y'all's hearts. And so basically what it is the last Friday of every month, we're going to dedicate that episode to going through questions that y'all have submitted. And I'm going to do my best to answer those questions, to offer advice from my story, from my experiences. Again, I don't know everything. I don't consider myself something special, but I have been through some stuff, and I have a story, and I've been healed, and I want to share that. And so this is a great way for me to go through questions and try to answer them for you. The cool thing is there are people that have questions. They want advice, and they just haven't submitted anything. And so it could be that your question that you've submitted answers their question as well. You can do that by going to the website, unfeigned.org, click on the live Q&A link at the top, and submit your form. You'll also notice, if you haven't gone to the website, and I guess this is a little plug. This always seems weird to make this plug, but go to the website if you haven't checked it out, okay? I think it's fun. I think it's awesome. But go there, unfeigned.org, and just check it out. If you have questions, comments, concerns, whatever, reach out, connect with me. There's something pretty fun, pretty cool, pretty awesome that I believe is part of the vision of Unfeigned. And like I've always said, the purpose of this podcast was to tell my story in hopes of helping even just one person walk from brokenness and or go from brokenness to healing. And it's been doing that. And man, my heart has been blessed seeing the impact it's having on people. And I'm so thankful and grateful for that. I want to build community. I want to create a movement of healing. And just a really cool way to do that is to involve y'all, right? And as you invest into the podcast, you're allowing me to invest into the lives of people that need healing. And so if this podcast has impacted you in any way, if you have gleaned something from it in any way, if you know somebody who could benefit from this podcast, if it's touched you in any way, any sort of impact, and you are like, you know what, I want this to continue. Like, I know the impact it's had on me. I know it's helping people. I know it can help more people, and I want to be connected in that way. One simple way is to make a one-time donation. You can do that right on the website. What's really cool and awesome, and I get to have a little, some fun with this, is anybody that becomes a monthly supporter. If you want to support this podcast monthly, then there's some cool things that you'll get. I get to have some fun because you'll get exclusive access to certain things. You get some fun merch and stuff like that. But check out the website. It's all on there. And again, I just think it's a really cool way to create this movement, to have y'all be a part of this movement, to create this community, and to continue to help people go from brokenness to healing. So until next time, we'll see you then.